All right. Hey, Ryan, thanks for coming on today. And
Thanks for having
so,
me.
yeah. Ryan was one of our members that came through TBC, and he was nice enough to volunteer to talk a little bit about his experience and just wanted to kind of share his journey a little bit. And I think one, you have an amazing story, and I'm so glad you did because I think your story will bring a lot of hope and inspiration to people that are struggling. So with that said, yeah, I definitely want to just say thank you for coming on because I know it takes some courage to share, but
Sure.
it's exciting, and I'm excited that you're here and wanting to do this. So, starting off, just kind of get paint us a little bit of picture where you were before we met, right? Before you came into TBC, and kind of just what was going on internally.
Yeah. So before we met more than 12 weeks ago or so, I was got to a state of my mental health essentially was in a place that I was not very familiar with experiencing a ton of stress, a ton of anxiety, and just basically things that I have never even thought about would happen to me essentially, or that I would ever deal with. So what I did was, I was with all the stress and all this anxiety, I would look for podcasts and self-help this and self-help that. And one of the first things I came across and what eventually led me to TBC was your podcast actually on Spotify.
Okay.
And what I had felt was a lot of your messages were relating to almost everything I was dealing with, which gave me a ton of peace. However, realizing they were compulsions at the end of the day, which just kind of led the fueled the fire and
Yeah.
kept this loop going. But when I had found TBC and talked with you, I knew it was going to be a perfect fit. And that excitement really got me, with a ton of hope and ready to move forward with this.
Well, so to just backtrack just a second here. So like
Yeah.
you're having these experiences, right? This
Hmm.
anxiety, bodily, mind racing, right? All this stuff going on, right?
Yeah.
And it was new experience. So what was your perspective, just curious, of like mental and emotional health prior to you having this experience?
Yeah, prior to all of this going on, I was, growing up as a competitive athlete and a lot of brothers and training hard my whole life. It was just kind of like mental health. Like I just pushed it off and it didn't think it was anything to ever take into consideration. And until I got to that point, and when I got to that point, I was so caught up in the actual themes and details of all these things I was ruminating on and never really addressed what was actually going on. And that's
Mm.
essentially where TBC had informed me everything that was the cause of all this. And it's a mirage, like you've talked about in your podcasts and your program a lot. You know,
Well, yeah, because again, we all experience all the emotional scale, right? Like there's
right.
nothing healthy about any particular emotion, right? What happens
Yeah.
is, as we've talked, is like when our tank gets really really full, and this can happen because again we are just at certain stages of life where we have a lot on our plate. It can
Yeah.
happen, during transitional phases of life, right? It's like that emotional tank
Hmm.
is really really full. We then project it onto our environment, or like these experiences can happen, and they're very common, right? And I think
Yeah.
that's the thing is like what happens sometimes though is because we're scared to even admit that we're going through something, or
Yeah.
at least for me that's what it was. I'm not saying that's you. For me, I know I was worried about telling people because it was like, what are they going to think of me, right? Like because that
Right.
was my perception prior to my own struggle, was like mental health stuff is for the, it definitely wasn't for me, right? It was
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
other people, right?
Same.
So,
Right.
and so that was, um, you know, definitely, I just wanted to kind of hear your experience of what you thought prior, because I didn't know if you felt like you were coming in with beliefs about even the idea of seeking out like
Yeah.
something for help and stuff. You know what I mean?
I came in with the belief of I have to escape this. I have to get rid of this. I'll do anything I possibly can, which was tons and tons and tons of stuff, and including coming, and listening to all these podcasts and everything.
Yeah.
But once I got through the program, I realized how backwards that solution is.
Yeah, so that's a good point. So like what was as you were experiencing this, like was it impacting your day-to-day life and you're just how you were functioning?
100%.
So
Yeah, I mean,
what
day-to-day
areas
life.
what areas
Yeah,
was it impacting?
sure. I mean, my family life, my home life, I just wasn't present. I was always in the past and ruminating and constant thinking and overplaying events and having the needs to, confess weird things and like just stuff that never needed to be brought up, essentially. It would affect my work life. I would avoid going to sporting events. It was for work and coaching teams and this and that. And I got to a point where like I need help. Like I need to, fix this
Well,
essentially.
because as that loop spins, right, that we talk about,
Hmm.
that wheel starts going, like you said, it creates this mirage, this illusion,
Nothing else matters other
and
than getting better. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and all of our behavior is directed to that, right? So whether
Yep.
it's, man, I
Yeah.
need to get reassurance, I need to say this thing to this person just to make sure that they heard it correctly, and that like all the things we're doing is really about us alleviating our own pain that we're experiencing.
Right.
And
Right.
and when that loop is really going though, it really does like take over your entire life, right? And
The
that's
whole life. Right.
and so you came so like obviously you have massive success in a lot of areas of your life. You've built a great family, you have your work and your business and all that stuff. And so, like, did it feel like what was it that made you take the actual jump if you'd been experiencing this stuff for a while? Was it like, did you feel like there was a lot at stake, or was it like you just got at the point where functioning was just not going the way you wanted to? Or like, what made you really like say,
Yeah.
right now I'm doing this? Because
Probably
I
a
say
little bit of
that,
both. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Let me preface the question
Yeah.
because what I've seen happen and what I know for myself is I put off getting help for a long time because my mind would come up with all the reasons why right now is not a good time, right?
Yeah.
And always have some
Yeah.
kind of argument for that. So I'm like curious, like what was it about that time that it was like I'm ready to do this now?
Yeah. Um, Again, probably a little bit of both. Probably I was completely sick of feeling that way. I mean, it was just miserable. I mean, and people that go through this, like I completely connect with you, and beforehand I would have never connected with them. But
Mm.
to take that jump was everything that I needed to do. I mean, I almost felt like there was no other choice. Like I just needed something, and based on our conversation, I instantly knew like it was this natural attraction to what I felt like would have been best for me.
Yeah.
And, the biggest thing, if I had like the biggest piece of all this was don't run from those, you have to feel them. And that's a huge part of this program. And you have to confront
Right.
and you have to not
Well,
resist.
well, and that's actually, and I'll release this right now because we're gonna be
Yeah.
rolling out something for free called it's either going to be called the feeling better letter or the feel better letter. And it's going to be just a kind of weekly letter that I'm going to put out for free. But the idea being, and this is so important because we're taught and programmed for many of us that, you're only supposed to feel good. Right.
Yeah.
And everything that we do is about quote unquote feeling better. Right. We do
Yeah.
so like, but what the secret to actually feeling in high states of emotion and energy is actually learning how to feel what we're feeling better, right? And
Hmm.
so there's like the double play on it, as you probably can tell. But the what our work is as individuals is actually learning how to feel like what we feel, how we feel right
100%.
now. And what most of us are doing is actually trying to escape that, to avoid that, to
Yeah.
push that away, to so that we pretend that we feel a certain way or block or mask certain things. And that's really the cause of actually most of our problems. Like most people, I would actually make the argument, are not sick or dysfunctional or have any diseases. It's really the unwillingness to feel this uncomfortable stuff that all of us experience that actually creates what we perceive to be these problems, right?
Problems.
And
Yeah.
when you learn how to, and because it is a skill you can learn,
Yeah.
it really is like you can take that with you and apply it, and it's something that anyone
Yeah.
learn, you know, and
At
that's
first you don't believe like what you're saying right there. It doesn't resonate until you fully accept I have to feel this. Like I have to get through this. And then as soon as that starts to click in, I remember the turning point in my journey, I feel like
yeah.
with you was when you said to me, you don't have to do anything,
Mm,
essentially. Like you
yeah.
have to just feel. You have to let it run its course, let it come in. And that's when I essentially started to really
Well,
get
how
better.
backwards is that though from everything else in
It's
life?
so yeah,
Right?
it's so,
Because
and
we're
that's
so
why
used
it's
to the more effort we put in, the more work we put in, that's what produces our results. But ironically, most of the work we're putting in is compulsive
it's
because it's
compulsive. It's
trying
all
to
compulsive.
escape, right? It's trying to escape,
Absolutely.
manipulate, and change our own inner state. Even if it is, like we talked about,
Yep.
listening to my podcast, right?
Yeah.
Or YouTube
Right.
or whatever. It actually like that can actually become compulsive in a way where
Hmm.
you're doing it in an escapism, right?
Yeah.
And that's part of the issue with the amount of content readily available for people
Yeah.
is that we can get into this compulsive state of consuming content, convincing
Yeah.
ourselves that we're getting better, ironically keeping ourselves in the loop.
It's fueling the fire. You even made a podcast, and that's one of the last ones I listened to of yours when
Yeah.
it said, quit listening to my podcast
Yeah, yeah,
or
yeah,
something.
yeah.
It was,
No, it was something like that. Yeah, I remember because it was
yeah.
like I'm probably the only podcaster that's ever going to say this, but don't listen to this if
Yeah.
you're doing it in a way that's causing you long-term harm,
Correct. Yeah.
right?
100. Yeah. Yeah.
And
That's where I was at.
yeah, and because it's so you know, and it goes against what we're taught for
Hmm.
or just our I shouldn't even say what we're taught, just what we're programmed to believe. So
Yeah.
so what was your if you had one, right? Because obviously I
Yeah.
talk about the hero's journey a lot, right? And
Yeah.
how
Yeah.
you were the hero of your own story, right? Like I didn't do anything. I
Yeah.
don't have any ability to actually change
Yeah.
anyone, heal any. Yeah, that's not anything that I have within me. Everyone has the capacity to do this on their own. And because this was your hero's journey, and you were ultimately the one that did this work to achieve the results you achieved, what was the rock bottom point for you where you were like that was the bottom of my journey where then there was the ascension back up and like was it where you were right before you joined or like what was it that made you like I'm in the pits of hell right now and I need to get out.
Yeah. I mean, it definitely was probably right before I joined. It was probably some of the first few weeks. I remember week one, or like the first couple days, I was very in a good energy state because I had something on the calendar. I was starting something new. I was pumped up. I was excited.
Yeah,
And then you start doing work and you start grinding and you realize like that falls off because that's kind of just a reassurance of something new may or may
sure.
not help you essentially.
Right.
And then I like once I was at that rock bottom point, it's unexplainable until you go through it. I don't think any like I would have never resonated with a place like that unless I went through it.
Hmm.
And that's so
Well, and it's funny you say that because I talk about that in the program actually at one point where I
yeah,
talk about how you can get um really addicted to joining things, right?
yeah,
Yeah,
right,
because
right.
you have that initial optimism, but then the work is still there, right? And so it's
Yes, yeah,
like, and it's pushing through that valley there that actually allows for the transformation, as opposed to what a
yeah,
lot of people do is they just bounce from thing to thing. They say, "Oh, I feel really good when I first joined," and then the work shows up,
yeah,
and then they quit and then they go restart something else. And because you get that
yep.
initial jump, you're like, oh, this must be better. And you can get in this cycle of just
It's a cycle, yeah.
like avoiding, right? And
Yeah,
that's such an important thing that you just said because it's so real that it's like a lot of people are like, okay, I want to join the program and I instantly want to feel better and I just want to keep
yeah.
getting better and better and better and better. And that's how they think they're progressing. But ironically, after that initial like start of something, the work is going
Yeah,
to show up. It's going to be there. It's
yep,
always been, right.
yep.
And that yeah, it's such an important point you just mentioned there. And
Yeah,
so
it's huge and it's all internal and I mean the minute you surrender, the minute you not resist, which you talk about a whole lot, and the minute you kind of just accept, I know that sounds, because I tried for
Yeah.
months to just
Well,
accept and accept and accept,
right.
but
And
the
because
minute
it's
that
hard to put into
happens, it
language,
clicks.
right?
Yeah.
Like concepts
Yeah.
we're talking about here are hard to put into language
Yeah.
that translate, because you gotta from a certain energy states, when you talk about acceptance, it's a
Yeah.
totally different experience, you
Hmm.
know. So but
Absolutely.
I
Yeah.
understand totally what you're saying. It's a hard thing to put it into language.
Yeah. You got to experience it. And I know a lot of the people listening to this will probably resonate with that feeling I'm talking
Yeah.
about.
Well, because yeah, I remember totally people hearing, okay, well, Matt, you need to accept the thoughts or you need to accept the feelings. And so you're trying to do it from the mind as
Yeah.
opposed to from a place of consciousness.
Yeah.
And you're trying to do it to get rid of something as opposed to dropping resistance. And
Yeah.
how the nuance of that is everything in whether
Right.
in what you're going to experience. Right.
Yeah.
So tell me about, or not me, tell me and those listening, like what would tell me about your change you've seen in yourself after coming through the program.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, through the darker parts and the deeper parts, my motivation was low. I had less care for work. I had, obviously, I just have always cared for my family, but my attention to them was probably in a much lesser state. They could kind of notice I was just always lost and unfocused. And again, I was so stuck in the past and worrying and replaying events, and the difference I'm at now is just incredible. I mean, I would even put where I'm at now ahead of where I was before this. The whole time I'm always like, when am I going to get back to who I was? Until I realized you're never going to get back to who you were. You're going to only get to a place where you're hopefully better than you were, and
Yeah, it
that's
should
kind of how
be.
I
Yeah.
feel. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's how
Well,
I
I
feel
think that's
now.
actually, I think that's obtainable for anyone going through something like this, because
Yeah,
I think this, like we've talked about, there is a higher opportunity present of like a growth of
yeah,
consciousness, right?
yeah,
Development of consciousness, which if you were unconscious, just feeling in a higher energy state, and then you'd be able to become conscious and actually, learn how to lift and transcend a lot of the stuff in life. It's like, I mean, like that's just such a radical difference of a way to live, you know?
it's huge. Yeah, being conscious is the way to live. And I spent 30 years unconscious
Yeah.
essentially, but now, I
Oh, dude,
mean,
you and me
I
both.
feel it.
Yeah, you and me
Yeah,
both.
right.
And so what, like, what were your main takeaways from this experience as far as like the tools or things that you were like, because you started implementing this, like that is
Yeah.
what for the change in your life?
Yeah. Essentially the AAA response has been huge for me. I mean, just that I'm able to catch stuff way quicker. If a thought comes in, I can agree, I can disengage, I can
Mhm.
allow. You kind of get to a point where you don't even have to attack as much anymore, I feel like, but initially you do.
Yeah.
Um, but just allowing all of it, and again, quote unquote accepting, but it takes a while to get there. Um, but once you know figure that out consciously, not in your mind, then it really is the biggest takeaway for me, just being able to
Yeah.
implement that.
I so echo what you're saying. And that's why, it's so funny because when a lot of people when they're first starting, like I want every tool and I want to know
Yeah.
everything. I want this. I want to start doing
Yeah.
everything. I want to work. And that was a big thing you and I talked about. I was like, you're
Yeah.
working too hard,
You
right?
work too hard,
Like
right? Yeah.
I was like, you need to take your foot off the gas, right? Ironically.
Yeah.
And it feels like you're doing the wrong stuff because you're like, well, no, I want to get better. And I'm like, you know, and that's the irony of it, right? And so
Yeah.
when you started, I mean, if I can reflect this to you, it's like
Yeah.
when you stopped trying and you actually
Hmm.
like from the mind and you started like, I'm going to implement this and actually really learning the nuances of implementing it from a state of like, consciousness
Yeah.
and changing your relationship with your mind, learning how to become non-resistant to stuff that's going on in the body. And because again, there's one thing to say it with the mind, but there's another thing to experience it, like
With the body, right?
internally, right? Like really
Yeah.
experience it. And
Yeah,
and that was when I saw, things really shift, and then it was just
I think
like,
so too.
you started just kind of just so after you started learning that and you started noticing progress in your life, like, and you started seeing yourself get results,
Yeah,
like, what what changed internally about how you felt about yourself? Or
yeah,
like, how do you feel about like the results that you've obtained?
yeah. No, I'm super proud of myself. I know a lot of people are afraid to admit or afraid to, confront something like this or admit they need some sort of help. And, I can't speak enough on how important it is. Just do it. Just admit it or take that leap. That's what gives me the pride about this whole journey. And just being more confident, essentially. I'm, much more aware. Much more, not just like, you know, everything flows a little bit easier. It's hard to explain again until you go through it. But it's the flow essentially of life now just seems different in a much better way. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Oh, it makes complete sense to me,
Yeah.
right? It's hard to articulate if you haven't seen that kind of shift. And so, like, what would you say is different about like the energy state that you're in pre and post, right? Like, so the energy state
Yeah.
you brought into your marriage or parenthood or your business
Yeah.
or, just interaction with people versus the energy state that you're bringing into your life now.
Yeah. I mean the energy state that I was in previous to my journey essentially. Um, I don't know if listeners are familiar with that, scale of energy, but it was in the lower to mid range. And then in this journey, it got down in the very low ranges, very, very, very low ranges. And you've talked about many times how you have to get back up, essentially going through each one again, right?
Mhm.
So, so I definitely climbed that ladder. And can you shift up and down still? Yeah, yeah, you can. But you, when you're conscious and when you're aware of all this, you have the tools, and from the program especially, like you're able to get in that higher state by using those tools. And I would say I'm higher. The state I live in right now is higher than even where I was prior to my
Yeah.
journey beginning, which
So
is huge.
for those listening, he's referencing the Maps of Consciousness by Dr. David Hawkins. And also Frederick Dotson has a similar scale, and so that's what we're referencing if you want to check out that, because really it's just about understanding the complete range of experience, and yeah, like really recognizing the lower states and how to actually navigate them to really get yourself into a higher state internally. And that's really
Yeah,
the problem of something like anxiety and fear is we can get stuck in the state because it becomes self-reinforcing, right?
yeah,
And that's literally all that happens is you just get stuck in that state. And what getting out of it really means is actually learning to confront that feeling itself, right?
yeah. The physical
And
feeling. Yeah,
yeah, and that's such a big part of it. So well, no,
huge.
and no, you have done, just to affirm you. I mean, you've done just phenomenal work on yourself, and I've watched the change happen, from what you've been doing and what you've been implementing. And so, like, going into the program, like you even said, there was doubt, there was uncertainty.
Hmm.
I think that's what
Yeah,
you, there was this like, will this work? Because you had tried obviously other things, and
sure.
will this
Many
work for
things. Yeah,
me? Like, is life ever going to get better, kind of thing, right? So
yeah.
talk to me about like how you see the future, how you saw the future then, and how you see the future now.
Yeah. Just way more optimism, man. Like even I've always been an optimistic person for sure. And then you hit this point of all this suppressed emotion just from years, and it exploded essentially.
Yeah,
Where when you're in that time of it exploding, you don't you lose a lot of that. You lose a lot of optimism. You lose a lot of hope. Motivation goes out the window.
sure.
But once you start to climb back and essentially use the tools that TBC provided me, especially, that's when you can see that optimism again, and you can see it from a different place, and you can see more opportunity, and you can see more. just goodness, like just brightness essentially, and just
Mm.
a different lens, you know. And you've talked about before how fear is a lens. Well, I honestly think there's a better lens ahead of fear than
Well,
you've ever experienced before, you know?
totally. Like I think each energy state is its own real lens, now.
Yeah, for
It
sure.
really does
Yeah.
like distort. You can, let's be real, you can be so up high and you can have a distortion in like a manic state, right? You know what I
Right,
mean?
right.
And
Yeah,
so
yeah.
so
Yeah.
yeah, so learning to, it's really about learning to notice where you are and notice if that's impacting how you're seeing things, right?
Yeah,
And be,
absolutely.
instead of thinking the things you're seeing are the actual way it is, it's really understanding that like my energy state really distorts things and has the capacity to distort things in a way where I really am not seeing things as they are,
And you don't
and
get that until you're informed
yeah,
about it.
and until
That's the
you're out
toughest
of it,
part.
especially, right?
Yes,
Yeah,
right. That too. Yeah.
that's when you really are like, whoa, like, yeah, that was a change.
Yeah. Crazy, right?
So dude, so cool, man. Well, again, thanks so much for taking the time to share. I really hope that someone listening is able to receive this and just watch and hear from you directly because it has been in a relatively short period of time, to see
Yeah,
where you've where you've moved yourself and through the work you've done. Um,
definitely.
yeah, just to how cool of a transformation that's been. So, but well,
Absolutely, man.
thanks so much, man. And with that, I wish you continued success and results as always. And yeah, I just really want to thank you for coming on and sharing.
Absolutely. Can't thank you enough. It's been life changing, and they're tools that I'm going to use the rest of my life. And even some of the releases and meditations I implement into my daily routine now, and I'm
Mm.
never going to stop. I think they're great. So
Thank you.
thank you.
I appreciate that feedback. Well, hey, all right. Talk to you soon.
Absolutely.
Have a good day.
Talk to you soon.
All
You
right.
too.
Hey there. So if you enjoyed that video, we've linked up a few more videos that we think you'd find helpful as well. And if you have found this helpful, we'd really appreciate your support by liking and subscribing. And if you're looking for help and guidance, please check out restoredminds.com as we have several options for you to get started. See you guys soon.